So, our next speaker who's getting wired up, okay? We found out last time he gave a presentation, he needs to be wired up. Because Christopher tends to move around. And Christopher's a long-time college teacher and so forth, Dr. Christopher Robinson. And he has a unique perspective on Bartram and his associates and all. And he likes to pursue the actual people that he spoke to. And what was the significance of it? Who did they speak to? And all that kind of good stuff. And so when he and I were at the Bartram Trail Conference in Darien, he started telling me about his latest delving into James Spalding. And I said, well, you know, we have James Spalding in Palatka at Spalding. And he says, oh, I know that. And I said, well, if you'll talk about Spalding, you know, we'd love to have you come visit us. And so he came last time, he was at our last symposium, and so this is a command performance. And we thank you very much for that. And a good friend, and especially a unique perspective on Bartram, Christopher Robinson.
So what I want to do today is talk to you about William Bartram and his travels up and down St. John. This is a map from just before his second trip, and actually you can see on the map, make sure I'm pressing all the buttons, right? You can see Bartram's Spalding's lower store and his upper store, and this gives you a sense of the state of most people's knowledge at that time. Of course, William has gone up and down the river with his dad about a decade prior, but this was the general knowledge most people had in St. John's at the time. So what I want to do in this presentation is I want to talk about the physicality of William Bartram's travels. It's easy to read his book, and he's very poetic, but he also traveled to places. So what I want to do is I want to follow him up and down his route and really deal with the physicality of this. Because the events happened at particular places, particular times. The people he met were at particular locations. And there's something very special about this particular trip that in about 5 minutes you will get. So what I want to do is I want to take you to these places, but also provide a map of these places. And one of the things that's going to happen on this trip is that William is going to come out from his father's shadow during this trip. He's going to visit places that his dad never visited. He's going to see things that his dad never saw, and that's going to be fairly special along this portion of the trip. William's going to turn 35 here in Florida. If you look at when the events happen and put it all on a calendar and you go, when were you born, William? These events are going to happen when he's turning 35. And that event's going to be marked with two special things. William is going to get the nickname, which is known by Puck Puggy. If you do it, it's reasonable to say that he got that nickname on his birthday, April 20th, but he's also going to see the place that he waxes poetic about, just south of Gainesville, a place called Payne's Prairie. William loves this place. He's going to wax very poetic about it, and that's going to occur roughly on his 35th birthday. But this is a traveler's guide. I got into William Bartram looking for places to go. I was living in Sarasota. Sarasota's flat. I was looking for things to do. And it's quite interesting that this map is here because this is the map that got me started. I was in Florida. It was flat. I was looking for places to visit. And I remembered I had seen this book in the St. Augustine bookstore. And I called them up and I said, what was that book? And they said, oh, it's William Bartram's Travels. That was almost to the week 7 years ago today that I did that. So it's very, very weird that I'm still doing it. I would never have guessed that I was. So that's the setup of this. These are all real places, and so I'm going to introduce you to these on a map. And if anyone wants to email, I can give my email, or you can get it from Sam. And I'm very happy to provide the map so that you can.
Christopher, we have Bartram birthday cake back here.
Bartram birthday cake back there as well. So I'm going to talk about some of the places that he visited, some springs, some campgrounds, some hikes, and some places that he visited. So that's going to be my aim here. So we're here in Palatka, this particular presentation, just south of us. So this is the home. The home is actually at Spalding's lower store. Now, Sam graciously provided me an image from 1791 of Spalding's lower stores, a map after the end of the American Revolution and the Treaty of Paris. Spain gets Florida back, they go back and explore. So this is what the best we have, 1791. But if you want to know what it looks like today, and I literally mean today, we go visit. I did the paddle this morning. So this is what it looks like today, quite different from how William would have seen this. But whatever this mark here is always, I'm always going to keep it. Don't you have this reference mark, because that's close to where we are right now. So William had been up and down to St. John's before with his father, John Bartram. And during this trip, they spent a lot of time staying with a man named James Spalding, who was one of the traders in this area. I stayed in a number of these stores. So there's Spalding's lower store, and there's also Spalding's upper store that you can visit as well. So if you visit Spalding's upper store, there's nothing there except for this beautiful oak tree and a Bartram mark. There's nothing there, but you can go visit it if you wish. They went to this store. Now, we need to know that the Indian trader wasn't just someone who sold goods. So it wasn't like Bartram's just buying things. The Indian trader was also part of the political process. You could not do a treaty negotiation. Couldn't do it without gifts. The Indian trader is absolutely essential in providing some of the gifts that the Indians wanted for this. So James Spalding, this is going to be important as you start thinking about William. James Spalding is not just some guy who owns a store with William's friends, but James Spalding is going to be really connected with the political machine of his time as well. The Indians typically gave deer skins or some kind of skin, depends on which location you are in the country, but the Indians typically would give skins, and they would trade these for all sorts of European implements. William himself singles out Spalding in his 1774 trip. He writes to Spalding, whose generous assistance I am indebted for the good success. Spalding had connections. This is going to be absolutely essential. William is going to be traveling into Indian territory, and he needed these letters of introduction to help him go and visit these people to travel safely. So he says he's going to provide me with connections, provide me with letters. These are all very essential. Give him horses, guides. William is going to take advantage of this, and this is going to be one of the ways that he's going to use the connections that he had made with his father to start going out on his own. That's what I want. This is the one I want. Who is James Spalding? James Spalding was actually from Scotland. He immigrated to the States here. And Spalding is going to have a number of stores up and down the East Coast. He's going to go into Charleston, then he's going to move into Georgia. He has a number of stores. So if you go to Fort Frederico on St. Simon's Island, Spalding has two places on the island there. One is just outside of where the modern Fort Frederica is. The other is south on the island. But he has a number of stores there. He also, as I said, he had his home around Fort Frederica. And there's nothing, if you go, there's nothing at his former homestead. There's nothing special about it. It was torn down a long time ago. He also has one very south. He marries one of them into the Macintosh family. That's going to be important for later in this presentation. He's married into the Macintosh family. And in 1774, just as our buddy William is getting started on his on his Florida adventure, Spalding's going to have a child. I tell you all of this because you need to know that when William enters James Spalding's life, James Spalding has a lot of other things going on. He's married, and he's just given birth. His wife's just given birth to his first children. So that's what's going on in Spalding, and he's still helping our guy out. So Spalding is fairly rich. He's well connected with the period. He also started a family. So this is a real guy. That's what's going on in his world. The start of the southern trip, so the start of the second trip that William took to the south, really begins with William writing a letter to a man named John Fothergill. And there's a long history between John Bartram, William's dad, and Fothergill. And so Fothergill had known about William prior to this. He had had drawings from William prior to this. But William writes him because the truth is, and so Sam talks about I have this weird way of thinking about these people. If you think about what was happening in William's life in 1772, William is not doing well. William, and I don't mean any offense when I say this, William was essentially a failure at this point in his life. He was the king's botanist's son who could never get his life together. So he's had one business failure after another. He's either chasing creditors or being chased by them. He's going back to Philadelphia, going back to North Carolina, dealing with creditors. So at this point in William's life, things are not going well. He's not our William yet. But he writes to Fothergill, who collected plants, collected seeds and drawings, and he says, I would like to make a trip to Florida. Fothergill says, how about Canada? William says, Florida, you say? And so, that's not the only time William ignores Fothergill. It's actually, you get into the letters and start seeing what's happening. William writes this one letter. He's like, Fothergill loves me. And Fothergill's writing John Bartram saying, William's not doing what I said. So Fothergill hires William. These are some of the drawings that William sent Fothergill to entice him into this. So Fothergill's going to pay him. It's always tough to do old money to modern money. But John was paid £50 a year to travel as the king's botanist. Fothergill is also going to pay William £50 a year. So to give you a sense of William is going to be able to do this trip. So this is really the background of this trip. Now, if you read any Bartram, you know his chronology is not his strong suit. He regularly gets days, years even off. So when you're trying to figure out, when you're someone like me going, well, when did that happen? You have to deal with all of your sources. So you have letters that William wrote. So we can go, okay, he wrote this letter saying, here's what happened. Early on, right after his Florida trip, he sent a letter to John Fothergill saying, here's what I've done. He sent some drawings and pictures and images. So we have letters that he wrote, the letter to Fothergill, report to Fothergill, and we have the final published account in the Travels. They don't agree with each other. So the issue then becomes, well, what do you trust? What are you going to rely on? In this presentation, I'm going to really heavily rely on the report to Fothergill, because that was written closest to the time, and there's some subtle differences between the different travels, but I'm going to rely on it. So William had decided to do this, go to Florida. So in fall of 1773, he's like, I'm going to go to Florida. But there's no indication in anything that he had planned anything more than really redoing what he had done with his father. So in fall of 1773, he's staying with James Spalding. And then early 1774, he comes to Florida and he meets one of James Spalding's agents, a man named Charles Malachi. William and Malachi spend some time talking and chatting, and Malachi says to him, well, we're building 3 new stores, we're expanding. So there's going to be traders going down to the upper store. William either gets this wrong or Malachi gets this wrong, it's not clear, we have William's account. But the upper store was technically being rebuilt, so there's the upper store, it's going to be rebuilt. And he also says there are 2 other stores. One is over here near Gainesville, Campany, right here, so this is going to be our Payne's Prairie. And there's another one, and I've asked Sam 5 times to tell me how to pronounce this. I'm going to try it. Tallahatchie. Did I get it? Oh, sweet. Tallahatchie, and over here. So we're going to follow William on this journey west. What's interesting about this journey is there's no indication that he'd ever thought to do this. John mentions the Payne's Prairie, Alachua Savannah, but he just says, like, there's the savannah, and it's supposed to be pretty, but he never went. So this is a map at roughly the same time period, and if you have a sense of Florida geography, you can immediately see that this map is not quite off, because Palatka is north of us, but he is showing the Payne's Prairie to Savannah, even north of that, but if you actually are looking at a modern map, you know this isn't quite correct. We live in a world where GPS is. I can put this. Imagine you're setting off west. This is your best map. This is as good as you're going to get, and you're like, I hope you go in the right direction. We don't talk about this a lot. It doesn't really show up in a lot, but almost every trip involves people getting lost. It doesn't show up in the final report usually, but so I mean, this is one of the best maps. This is a good map from the time. This is Bartram actually worked with one of the authors here. So okay, we're going to follow him across. So he's talking to Malachi. Malachi says, "Hey, we're building these 3 new stores." William says, "Gotta go." So William decides at this point, you know, I can visit these places. I could go with these places. This is going to be the first time he's really going to go out from under just what he had done with his dad. He's going to go west. His dad never went west. Now, this is going to be really for you to decide. I can't do this for you. But I find it really interesting that this happens on his 35th birthday. You read his letters, you read the Account of Father Guild, you figure out when things happen. This is happening around April 20th. And that has stuck with me because I don't know if anyone has read Dante's Divine Comedy, right? But the conceit of the book is Dante begins the book with, I was at the midpoint of my life, 35. And I started thinking about 35. John, the father, met Peter Collinson, who was his great lifelong correspondent, 34, but our first letter that we have is actually from when John is 35. So something I just kept thinking about this 35, but it's worth thinking that William he's not a child. He's 35 years old, he's unmarried, he's had one failed business adventure after the other. He's decided what he needs to do is go west to see things he's never seen. So I'm going to talk about the events. I'm going to take you with him. We can go to these places today. We're going to see the places that he visited, but I'm really going to follow the account in the letter to Fothergill. This is one of those academic questions, what happened when, and I think what happened closer in time is what we're going to work out. So what he's going to do is he's first going to go west to Coxawillo, and here he's going to get his nickname Puggy the Flower Hunter. He's also going to visit Payne's Prairie, and William loved Payne's Prairie. I'm going to give you his descriptions, and there's no doubt about it that William loves Payne's Prairie. Absolutely wonderful birthday present for my buddy. He's going to come back to the lower store and go to Blue Springs, and on this trip, on the way back up, he's going to visit Mount Royal. Many people went to Mount Royal this weekend. That's when this happens. He had actually visited Mount Royal with his father a decade prior, but on this trip. Then he's going to go from the lower store back west. So he's going to pass Payne's Prairie again. He describes it in his book. He's going to return back to the lower store, and then we get the story of the Long Warrior. So this is when that's going to happen. He's going to turn back. Then finally he's going to go back from the lower store to Blue Springs and then to Salt Springs. So we're going to have several of these trips. All right, so here we go. So late April, we're here. We're going to go west to McCaffrey and Payne's Prairie. William's going to travel with a bunch of traders. They're looking for lost horses. He's going to travel with them. And when he gets there, he meets a man named Cowkeeper. Now, Cowkeeper was well known. Cowkeeper was the leader of the area. He'd been involved in prior negotiations. But Cowkeeper meets him. He offers William a special pipe. The peace pipe is typically much longer than a normal pipe. Recently, I've done a lot of work with John Bartram, and it was actually, so I didn't know this until I was working on that research, that if you were offered a peace pipe and you didn't take it, it was a sign of war. So take that for what that's worth. And then he says, we had this black drink, and then Cowkeeper says, I give you unlimited permission to go explore, and we're going to call you Puggy. And so this is when, this is his 35th birthday. Now he's getting this new name, and the next day he's going to visit Payne's Prairie. If you visit the area today, it's in McCaffrey, Florida. There's really not much there. No offense to McCaffrey, Florida. But if you go to the Texas Preserve, there's a nice little hike.
Micanopy.
Here's one of the weird things about being me, is I read a lot, and then I say the word, and thank you, Micanopy. Wait, I got Tuscaloosa right, and I didn't get that one? Up and on.
Tallahatchie did really good.
All right. That will be the first thing I mispronounced today. All right, it's early. All right, so here he's going to go west to Payne's Prairie. Hopefully I said that correct. He goes west to Payne's Prairie. He loved Payne's Prairie. He absolutely did. And at William Bartram's time, when he wrote a book, he typically introduced it in subscription form, and people would then buy the whole thing. He used his description of Payne's Prairie to sell his book. This is a spot that William loves. So since this is devoted to William, and it is his birthday, or close to it, we're going to let William talk about Payne's Prairie. So we're going to go over to Payne's Prairie, and here's what he says. Now on a sudden opens to view an enchanting scene. So So while you read, I'm going to show you some places. So if you go, this is North Paynes Prairie. You walk out, and there is a boardwalk that you can see. Then you pass by the sink that William writes about. You can continue going around. You can do a hike out. There's actually several hikes to the middle of Paynes Prairie. This is going from the north into it. And they have these platforms. And from the platforms, you can look to see the trail you've just done. William loves Paynes Prairie. Here's a picture from the south of Paynes Prairie. There's a beautiful tower that you can look over Paynes Prairie. I think it's a double rainbow this particular day. To give you a sense of what William responded to. This is not all, he continues. Right. The vast plain is the winter season, a beautiful lake of water. I didn't see an incredible number of fowl, but here's one for you. Now, if you go to Paynes, pause it for a second. Alligators, and 3 alligators that are right at the end of the boardwalk during a particularly wet season. On the trails that you walk through, they're just coated with alligators. And so it's easy for us now, right? I just kind of walk a mile up there. William didn't have this kind of like, hey, I wonder if there's many alligators here. He's going into this, I mean, obviously he knew there were alligators, but he didn't have a boardwalk. Yeah. Right, so you can visit there today. William loves this place. William absolutely loves this place. He writes about it all the time. He has several maps of it. And what's interesting, if you go, I mentioned there's a tower on the southern end of it, and the tower is actually here on the map. Meaning if you are at the tower, that's where you are on this map. So you can stand really getting a view that our buddy William would have got. And if you're so inclined, like myself, you can stay at the Palatka campground there in the state park. So they have a number of tent sites and camper sites. So William's going to come back to Paynes Prairie. He's now going to go back to the lower store. Then he's going to go up to the very, very amazing springs. This is modern day Blue Springs. The great alligator battle was going to happen on this trip. So William reports in his book that he was canoeing and alligators were on both sides so close that he could feel them. People didn't believe him that this had happened. A little footnote, James Spalding's wife, towards the end of her death, she met with an individual. The guy's like, hey, I'm about to go to Philadelphia. Do you have anything you want to tell William? And she goes, that alligator battle happened. So for some reason, she singled that out. Something we need to know about. But this is going to happen on this part of the trip. You don't have to take the canoe all the way. Here's Misha getting, lucky Misha got 2 images, that's not typical. But Misha and I decided to go from Pontoon Island where you can camp. William passed by there, there's a marker there, down to Blue Springs, absolutely gorgeous. And it's an easy paddle, 3.5 miles each way. I'm sitting there, Misha's taking this picture because he waited till he got in the canoe to go, I've never canoed before, so that's me going, we're all going to die. So I'm very happy with my buddy Misha. You can hike and camp at both places. I promised you this was going to be a traveler's guide. You can hike and camp at both places. This is Pontoon Island. They have a nice little trail there, several trails. You can walk out to the water. To get to Pontoon Island, you have to take I hate to justify it calling it a boat trip. It's literally like, the length of this room, but it is an island, so you got to cross this island. If you go down in the wintertime to Manatee Springs, you can see a number of manatees in there. You go to the cooler months, are absolutely wonderful, worth visiting to see. Lots of things to do as you're following our buddy William around. So William's going to go back up to the lower store. Meanwhile, stopping at Mount Royal. I did this last year. Mount Royal is one of the few places that William drew. So we have actually one of William's drawings of Mount Royal. It was one of the places that he considered special. He saw it with his dad, and he saw it again on his own trip on this particular leg. So he's going to return to the lower store. So here we are. And he's going to go back west across to nearby. I visited Manatee Springs because to visit this Indian town, you actually have to go up the river, and I didn't have a canoe with me at that particular, or kayak. But you go to nearby Manatee Springs. It's in the same area. William writes about this. This is not out of the way. He writes about it. He actually writes about, say, the manatee carcass here. So he's going to return to the lower store, and there's going to be the story of Long Warrior. Many people met Long Warrior this weekend. He appears in the narrative. William gets back to the lower store, and Long Warrior's there, and he wants trade goods because he's about to go to war, and he needs goods. And Elijah says, I can't give you goods. And Long Warrior says, if you don't give me goods, I'm going to rain down fire on you. And Elisha's like, that's great to hear, but I still can't do that. They end up negotiating for half the goods that they wanted. But as Dorinda said, Long Warrior is the only individual picture that appears in Bartram's book, but that's who he was. He was the leader of this particular band who were about to go off to war. And the event involving him happens at the lower store. On the return for the second trip to the West. Also at this trip, William's very proud of this. It's one of those things that 250 years later, you just see people getting a dig at their father. The same day they return, William's like, they called for Puck Puggy. They don't say they called for William. They called for Puck Puggy because there was a rattlesnake in the camp. And so William kills the rattlesnake, and they're like, we need to bleed you. Because you are too manly. You're too strong. We need to make you milder and more tame. Pause with me for a second. This is all part of this idea that William is now coming of age. He's coming into his own. He's got this new name. He's seeing these new things. And now look at me. I'm Puck Puggy, the rattlesnake killer. I bring this up because if you read Travels and you read John Bartram's account of his trip, John and William disagree about who killed a particular rattlesnake at the Indian conference they went to in the 60s. So you just know that, this is William saying, guess what? All right, so William is going to then go up the river. This is when he has a hurricane. In the Travels, he conflates the two trips and has the hurricane happen at the same time as the alligator battle. I guess it made it seem more amazing. But they actually happen on two different trips. He's going to come back up and go to Salt Springs. Very beautiful. It's a nice little watering hole. You can go spend the day. You can also camp. When I went camping, I had a little friend right over my campsite. I was like, a raccoon's friendly. This one was. Nothing got stolen. But very beautiful. You can still go to this day. This picture is actually nice. You can actually see some of the springs coming up out of the water. William writes about this. It looks very different from how William described it. The water is not jumping up out of the water, as he said. So after all this, William's going to return and come back up to Frederica, and then Sunbury, which is up here in southern Georgia. He sends the first report to Father Gill. He says, Father Gill, here's what I have been doing. Here's samples, here's paintings, and so forth. We can actually see where Spalding's store was on old maps of Sunbury. There's nothing there today. I've been to Sunbury. It's a beautiful small town, just nothing to see for our interest, but this would be where it is on a Google map. From here, William is then going to go back to Georgia. But let's go back to Spalding for a second, because the American Revolutionary War is happening. You wouldn't know that from reading the Travels. William doesn't make a mention of this fact that the American Revolutionary War is going on. So Spalding actually remains loyal to the British. He ends up losing a lot of property during the war. His Florida stores in particular went to Spain, obviously because of the Treaty of Paris. So it doesn't seem like things are going to go well for our buddy Spalding. Spalding stores get new owners, and they end up being abandoned. Back in, I want to say the 60s, this time, 1960s. I don't remember the date of publication. There was an excavation at Spalding's lower store, and there were very few artifacts. Most of them are going to be rusted in like a piece of gun or a bullet, but they actually had some artifacts that you might not expect to be at an Indian store in Florida. Very fine porcelain, very fine creamware, with beautiful designs on them. So Spalding wasn't just selling, rope and nails. He was selling some fine products. So Spalding's estates were confiscated. He ends up getting them back. He ends up somehow recovering, and by 1790 he has over 5,000 acres of land and 94 slaves. this man is wealthy. This is a wealthy individual coming after the war. He is famous. In fact, I was reading a biography of his son, and his son took the time to point out that my dad was one of the first people to read cotton here. I'm not sure that's his voice, but you know, might as well be. So he's one of the first people to read cotton, and he, as one of the wealthiest men in Georgia, he was appointed a commissioner of Frederick and Brunswick, and in one of those like weird, how does that connection? Spalding was actually involved in one of the first cases of when Georgia was a state going in front of the Supreme Court. The short end of the story is this. During the American Revolution, the colonies confiscate British property. Spalding had bought some goods from a British trader, and the war happens, doesn't get paid. Now, the trader sues Spalding to get the money. And Spalding's like, look, I will gladly give you the money I owe you. That's not the problem. But if I give it to you, Georgia's going to take it. And sure enough, the guy wins the lawsuit. Georgia files countersuit. This goes in front of the Supreme Court. The guy, again, this goes in front of the Supreme Court the second time, and he would have won again, but by that point, the 11th Amendment, we don't remember the 11th Amendment, right? It was about who can sue the states. And so it was ultimately decided that the guy didn't have standing anymore to sue the state of Georgia, and so his money was never paid. It wasn't Spalding's fault, it was the war. Anyway, Spalding died a couple of years later. He is buried in Colonial Park Cemetery in Savannah. I mentioned earlier, Spalding married into the McIntosh family. He's actually buried in the same plot as Lackland McIntosh. And to make a shameless self-plug, and a plug for the Traveler, there's a recent article in the Traveler, the William Bartram magazine, that I wrote about William's relationship with Lackland McIntosh, but he and Spalding are buried actually in the same area. So, I don't want to end on a sad note, so thankfully I have one slide enough for this. But William developed friendships. These are real people. They really travel. They really spend time together. William really spent a lot of time talking with Charles Malachi. He's like, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go west. So, but after the war, Lackland McIntosh's nephew goes and visits William, and William writes a letter to Lackland McIntosh in 1796. And here's the letter that he writes. He writes, I conclude earnestly requesting that you please present my respects to your brother William Spalding. William had been close to these individuals, but given the time it takes for mail to travel, news to travel, the war that was going on, and all the rest, he hadn't known that Spalding had actually died prior to this point. There's also something very interesting in this PS, this postscript. He says, please give my respects also to good old Don McIntosh. If you went to Darien a couple months with us, we went to a grave, the McIntosh graveyard, and there's a Bartram marker there for an event where William waited out a rainstorm at Donald McIntosh's house. If that happened, remember we have the travels and we have the letters to Fothergill. If it happened when it happened in the travels, that happened on his 34th birthday. So kind of interesting looking at some of this chronology of these. If it happened, but it appears in the travels, doesn't appear in the letters, and he mentions that while he was with Donald McIntosh, a lightning bolt hit a tree 50 yards from him and blew it up. I'd tell everyone about that. I'm telling y'all what happened to someone else. So, so what we've done is we followed William Bartram south. We followed him on a southern trip. So this is where, if you have a question, I don't know, if you have a question, you go, I don't know where this thing is. So we've been to Spalding's lower store several times. This is going to be his home base. We followed him west to Payne's Prairie, where we saw this. Then we followed him to the upper store and Blue Springs. We followed him then to Mount Royal. We then went west, followed him west again. Then we followed him down to Blue Springs nearly, back up to Salt Springs. We're going to go back up to Fort Frederica, Sunbury, and finally where Spalding is buried in Savannah, Georgia. We followed him around his 35th birthday. We saw that he got a new name. He's sort of coming into his own, becoming his own man. He's actually got his own Indian name. And he also saw the place that he loved the most during this trip. From this point, he's going to go back to Savannah. He's going to North Carolina, almost going to Tennessee. He doesn't quite make it. Then he's going to head down to Mississippi and Louisiana over the next couple of years. But those are later talks. Thank you very much.